guest speaker, Chiza Westcarr, has been with us for a long time now, and I think this is her third presentation that she's done. And the reason why we love having Chiza present with us is because, well, first of all, she's an extraordinary lady, but her values and what she's about, what she stands for, really aligns with who we are. So there's a natural connection. Chiza is totally dedicated and has dedicated her life in empowering and educating beauty professionals. It is something that I've always loved about her, that she's really wants to share her knowledge with you so that you have more abilities, more comfort, get more results, and really do a better job as a beauty professional. So that's definitely something that I love about Chiza, and that really aligns with our values as well. Another thing that I really, really love about Chiza is that she is constantly self-developing. And that is a quality that we all should strive for continuously. It's a continuous journey in our life to learn and to discover and to take the actions that we need to take so that we continuously expand our knowledge, our understanding. And so Chiza, God, she's every time I see her or I talk to her, she's done something new, something else, and she always throws herself into the deep end. I've just now, 2 minutes ago, she told me about this whole thing that she's been doing, and you know, it's just incredible. It's really incredible, and I love her for that. And I hope that you will be inspired by her amazing aura and willingness to continuously grow, even though she already knows so much. I think that she's the kind of person that when you realize, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know, and she's like constantly feeding knowledge. That is just incredible. Another thing that is truly something I admire and that aligns with, you know, our values, is that she is totally passionate. She is such she believes in what she shares and preaches. And she does it with such passion. Like, you know, you can feel it, that she really wants you to hear the message. She's seen the impact that the things that she teaches has, and so she does it with, you know, with so much urgency for you to grasp and learn. You know, if you haven't met Chiza yet, I can just tell you that she's a smart cookie. I spoke to Chiza on Friday, and I said to her, look, Chiza, if I'm going to list all the things that I love about you and all the things that all the degrees, I'm going to take half the talk. So I'm going to be brief with this. She has a master's degree in human nutrition. I hope that's right. She has an advanced diploma on nutritional science or nutritional medicine. She has a Bachelor of Business Study, and she's also the founder of the Nutritional Skincare Academy. Through the years, Chiza has done many presentations like this and in big forums and in big stages, and she's really built quite a reputation as a speaker, but also as an expert on the gut health and the skin microbiome. She's actually presented on those subjects in a previous Future Beauty talk. And if you want to see that, we'll put a link on this recording for you to watch. Now, as I said before, she's always striving to expand her knowledge, and she did a lot of research into the stress, the brain, and the skin health. And this is the topic that she's going to discuss with us today. I think the skin is an amazing organ, but it also is one that is very sensitive to all kinds of things, the nutrition and the way that we treat it, but also stress is a big one. And it's funny because I came here this morning in the office thinking, okay, what am I going to say? And I could feel myself stressing up. And then I spoke to Chiza a few minutes before, and would you believe it? She too was like, oh my God, what am I, why am I doing this talk? It's such a big subject, and we both were feeling stressed. So we do tend to stress, and that's okay from time to time, but it's that continuous, stress that impacts us. And for a lot of the time, we stress about nothing. Nothing. We make big things out of nothing. And that's another topic, but we're going to dive into the mechanics and everything that's involved in here. I hope that this subject will open your eyes, that it's going to inspire you to do certain things, and maybe the way that you share that with your clients. It's so important to share everything with your clients. They're not stupid people. They want to know, and the more you educate yourself, the more you can share, and that's what it's all about. So I'm very sorry for taking so much time, but here she is, Chiza Westcarr. Please join me in welcoming her with a big warm welcome.
Oh, Frank, this is your best.
Can you unmute everybody just for a second? Please, can you unmute them or not? Just so we can hear the applause. We can't hear anybody. Okay, all right. Well, you're welcome. Over to you, Chiza.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Frank, I've got to say, this is your best introduction yet. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for today's presentation, The Impact of Stress on Skin Health. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Frank so very much for your very warm introduction and for always allowing me an opportunity to share my knowledge. I've chosen the topic, the impact of stress on skin health, because I think it's a very relevant one to all of us as skin therapists. We often are presented with a lot of inflammatory conditions, and we have our in-clinic modalities, we have our products that we recommend for home use, but we don't always get the results. And so it's really important to look within. And this may be by addressing nutrition and gut health, but it's not often that we actually look at the role of stress. And so I thought that although it's a very broad topic, that I would keep it as skin related as I can. There is an intricate relationship between stress and skin conditions, and this has been documented since ancient times. Recent clinical observations have also linked psychological stress to the onset or aggravation of multiple skin diseases. And so what I thought I would do is shed some light on some of the recent discoveries in the field of the brain-skin connection. And I thought it would be a good idea to look at how the skin reacts to stress by activating the endocrine and immune systems. And I thought it would be good to also look at the negative impact of chronic stress on skin health. I'm incredibly lucky, and I'm lucky because I get to work as both a dermal clinician as well as a nutritional medicine practitioner. I work out of two practices in Sydney, one in Double Bay called All Saints Skin Clinic, and one in Erina on the Central Coast called Dolce Vita Skin. And in both practices, we really adopt a holistic approach. We don't just look at what the patient or client presents us with in terms of inflammatory skin conditions, but we look for internal connections. And this can be gut related, diet related, but it can also be stress related. And stress isn't really a topic that we see focusing on skin health. And so that's what I would like to do today. I also run an online academy called the Nutritional Skincare Academy that is dedicated to skin therapists, medical aesthetic practitioners, nurse practitioners, and skin therapists in all their guises, dermal clinicians, beauty therapists, and skin specialists or therapists as well. And these classes are all designed to give you additional knowledge to what we learned in our formal education settings. I really focus on gut health and nutrition as they both relate to skin disorders. I have some new courses about to start shortly as well. Another thing that also gives me great joy is that I have quite a few skin clinics that refer their difficult inflammatory skin conditions to me. Sometimes they feel that they have done as much as they can, or they're not sure where else to go. And so they send these clients to me, and by looking at gut health and their nutrition, we really are able to successfully manage these conditions. So let's get started. On the agenda today is we'll be taking a look at the major components of the stress response. We're going to be looking at the sympatho-adrenal medullary pathway, bit of a mouthful, and the HPA axis. And we're going to be focusing on the roles that they play in the stress response. We're also going to be looking at the skin as both a perceiver of stress and a target of stress responses. And no presentation that I do would be complete without me mentioning nutrition, the role that diet plays in the stress response. So, what is stress? Well, medical research estimates that as much as 80 to 90% of all diseases is the result of stress. And so stress can be defined as a physical, mental, or emotional pressure or tension caused when a person perceives that the demands they are faced with exceed their ability to cope. And so stress is a biological and physiological response experienced on encountering a threat that we feel we are not able to deal with the resources that we have. So it's described as being an adaptive response to a stressor. It's our body's natural reaction to what we perceive as threats, and these can be real or imagined. And we know that stress isn't always negative. It can be positive as well. And when we look at stress that is positive, we describe this as eustress. It's known as eustress. And this type of stress is great for motivating us. What it does is it increases our performance and it increases our drive. It increases alertness, it sharpens our concentration, it ups our performance, and this is the type of stress that gets us out of bed every single day. But then we have the converse of that, and we describe this as distress. So distress is negative stress, and this type of stress occurs when we feel like we are unable to cope. This type of stress decreases our performance and our drive. It affects our mood, it leads to poor dietary choices. You think about it, when you're feeling highly stressed, the last thing you want to do is sit down to a healthy meal. You know, we tend to rather grab something on the go, something that's easy to swallow, and that we can get done in just a few minutes. And so this type of stress also leads to adverse health outcomes. It can impact our relationships, and it can also impact our quality of life. So when we look at stress, we describe it as being either lasting for a short amount of time or lasting a long time. And we split stress into acute stress that lasts a short time. And an example of this would be hopping into your car and driving to work, ready for your first appointment, say at 9 o'clock. But up ahead, you meet a traffic jam, and you know that it's going to make you late for work. The kind of stress that results from this traffic jam is described as acute stress. It comes from the demands and the pressures of the recent past or near future. It's the kind of stress that you experience where, as you're getting ready to leave for work, you have a big argument with your boyfriend or your partner. It's the kind of stress that you feel where you are criticized by your boss for not doing a task as he or she expected it to be done. It's the kind of stress that you feel where you swerve your car to avoid hitting a cat running across the road. So that type of stress lasts for a short time only. And then we have stress that lasts a lot longer. And we call this chronic stress. This arises out of long-lasting events and circumstances beyond your control. So an example of this might be a bus driver who takes the same route every morning. And every single morning, he experiences traffic jams. He's very stressed, but this is ongoing. It's something that he experiences every day that he goes to work. Another example might be the kind of relationship that you have with your partner where you're always arguing and bickering. You have big slanging matches about nothing much at all. But these happen every day to the point where you actually start to feel quite anxious when you hear his key turning in the lock when he comes home, because you know that you're going to be having another fight over nothing. It might also be what you experience when you go to work where you have a toxic boss, or you work in a toxic workplace where coming to work fills you with dread because you know there's going to be gossiping and bickering, and it's just not a very nice place to work. So all of these examples are what we term chronic stress. So we've all heard of the fight or flight response, and this is also known as the acute stress response. And this refers to a physiological reaction that occurs in the presence of something that is terrifying, something that scares you, something that wants to make you run away. And it can be either mental or it can be physical. And what happens is that this response or this reaction, whatever it is triggered by the release of hormones that prepare your body to either stay and fight, to deal with whatever this threat is, or to run away safely. And so you can see a picture of a poor zebra being hunted down by a lion. And you can imagine as that zebra is trying to get away, you can imagine how its heart must be pounding. You can imagine its eyes wide open, its pupils dilated, its breathing is much faster than normal. And all of these responses are turned on to allow it to escape. Well, we as humans also go through a very similar physiological response to anything that we determine to be scary, from which we need to either escape or stand and fight. And so whether we stay and fight or try and run away, there are physiological changes that happen within us. Our pupils dilate. We might find the blood draining from our face. We might start to shake quite nervously. Our heart rate is beating wildly. Our breathing is labored. And these signs are all the result of us being scared by whatever it is, whatever the stressor is. And so we look at 3 stages of the stress response. We talk about the first stage being the alarm stage. And this refers to the initial symptoms that the body experiences when it's under stress. This stage occurs when we first perceive something to be stressful. And the body, in response to us perceiving that this is stressful, it initiates the fight or flight response. We discussed that just on the slide before. And this fight or flight response prepares you to either fight or run away. And so, as I mentioned, our heart rate increases. We find our breathing increasing. Our blood pressure increases. Blood sugar is released from the kidneys. So glucose is released from the kidneys to help fuel our escape. So as well as that, we find that our muscles tense up. We find also that there's a vasodilatation of our arteries to the periphery of the body. So the arms and the legs receive more blood to the area to help galvanize us in order to escape. And so these changes that occur during this response, if they are prolonged, will actually cause a wear and tear within the body. Ideally, we want that response to actually slow down and shut down once we have escaped. But we know that there are situations and circumstances where these physical changes actually remain because the stressor, as we perceive it, persists. And so the next phase then is the resistance phase. And ideally, what should happen after the initial shock, once things settle down, the body then begins to repair itself. And so our heart rate and our blood pressure rates start to normalize. Cortisol, which is our stress hormone, which we're going to be talking more about, also starts to lower. And ideally, we return to our pre-stress state. But as I mentioned, if the perceived stress continues, then the body actually stays in that activated state. And what happens when this happens is that it continues to secrete our stress hormones, cortisol. We find that our blood pressure also remains elevated. Now, the body, unfortunately, cannot maintain this level indefinitely because as it tries to, it starts to notice that its resources begin to eventually deplete. And signs of the resources depleting are when we start to notice that we become frustrated very easily or that our concentration becomes poor. We then move into the exhaustion phase. And the exhaustion phase happens where, because of a prolonged exposure to the stressor that I mentioned, where I also mentioned that the body's natural resources begin to deplete, the resulting wear and tear cause a suppression of the immune response. So our immune system is then impacted. And what this then leads to are a variety of health issues, stress-related issues and illnesses. And these include fatigue, burnout, depression, anxiety, digestive problems. I have a lot of people who come to see me with inflammatory skin conditions who have digestive issues that range from not being able to go to the bathroom for up to 5 to 6 days at a time, or having chronic diarrhea. And so you might also find that a person starts to suffer from anxiety ongoing and even depression. And what's interesting about this exhaustion phase is that the changes that occur in the body during this phase continue, whether the perceived stressor is considered eustress, so whether it's positive stress, or distress, where it's negative stress. You will find that cortisol levels continue to be heightened. Stress levels continue to be heightened. Blood pressure continues to be elevated. And ultimately, what this means is that if we do not take active steps to try and manage whatever the stressor is, we will then suffer ill health as a consequence. So stress manifests itself in different ways. We have examples of emotional stress that can occur. And this might be seen with us becoming easily frustrated or suffering from mood swings, having feelings of overwhelm, not being able to cope, but also having just quite low self-esteem. So when we suffer from low self-esteem, We go through feeling that we're worthless. We hate ourselves. We can sometimes feel lonely. So bad in some cases that we also begin to avoid social contact and sort of going out and spending time with friends. And then we have physical symptoms. And these include having lowered energy levels, having bowel function issues. Like I mentioned, you might find someone having chronic constipation or quite severe diarrhea. Tachycardia, where they experience a quickened heart rate. They may not be able to sleep. They're feeling quite fatigued, like I said, having low energy. Some other physical symptoms might be having frequent colds, having a loss of libido. I actually have quite a few clients who come to see me with stress-related disorders. And one of the things that always comes up is low libido. Some people might also clench their jaws and have TMJ issues. They might grind their teeth, for example. And then we have cognitive symptoms of stress. And these include forgetfulness, being disorganized, having a racing mind, so having racing thoughts, being constantly worried, exhibiting poor judgment, and only ever seeing the negative side of things. And then the last group of symptoms are our behavioral symptoms. And behavioral symptoms can include, when it comes to food, changes in appetite, either eating too much and of the wrong kinds of foods, or losing complete interest in food. It can also manifest as addictive behaviors, such as maybe drinking a lot or starting to smoke when you never used to smoke, or you'd stop and you start to smoke again because you feel that it's going to help you manage your stress. But it can also be manifested as nervous types of behavior. And this might be fidgeting or pacing up and down. It might be nail biting or picking at your pimples, for example. Procrastination and avoiding responsibilities is also another behavioral manifestation of stress. So next, we're going to take a quick look at how stress impacts vital body systems. So the autonomic nervous system has a direct role in the physical response to stress. It forms part of the peripheral nervous system, and it controls both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. So when we look at the sympathetic nervous system, we really are focusing on the fact that this is responsible for our fight or flight response. And so whatever the stressor is, it causes the activation of this part of the nervous system. And as part of the fight or flight response, we find that blood is sent to the peripheral parts of the body. So our feet, so that we can run fast, our hands, so that we can sort of power them as we run. It is also responsible for the dilation of pupils, increased sweating, the accelerated heartbeat, and also the widening of the bronchial passages, so that we can really get some air and oxygen into our lungs. And it stops digestion. It decreases gut motility, because digestion and gut motility are considered non-essential at this time when you're trying to escape. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is the nervous system that restores balance. It's responsible for our rest and digest part of the nervous system response. And so it conserves energy, it slows the heart rate, it increases digestion. So this is the calming part of the nervous system, often referred to, like I said, as the rest and digest. So next, we're now going to look at which parts of the body are involved in the stress response. when it comes to short-term stress, we look to the sympatho-adrenal response. And so short-term, what happens is whatever the stressful or the stressful incident is, or the stressor is, the initial response that we experience is mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. We've just looked at the sympathetic nervous system, and I mentioned that it's part of our fight or flight response. And what happens here is that the event, for example, think of a child running out in front of the car and you're the mother. As you scream and run towards the child, that stress response activates the sympathomedullary pathway. And so what happens is the hypothalamus in the brain receives that signal of stress, and immediately it activates the adrenal medulla. And it activates the adrenal medulla to then release epinephrine or adrenaline. So that's really important. For that instant response, the hypothalamus communicates with the adrenal glands, and it's the adrenal medulla that is activated, and it releases epinephrine or adrenaline, norepinephrine or noradrenaline as part of its response to that stressed state. So it causes your heart rate to increase. It causes perspiration to happen. It really primes you to fight or run away. We then have the HPA axis and its response to stress. So the HPA axis tends to be activated where there is long-term repeated stress. So the sympatho-adrenal pathway tends to be activated for short-term immediate stress, whereas the HPA axis is for long-term repeated stress. And this describes the interaction between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. Like I said, triggered by stress, but more of a long-term type or nature. And so what happens is when the body experiences stress, or when it is perceived stress, it then mobilizes a variety of physiological and behavioral changes via both the nervous system and the endocrine system. And what this does is it helps us cope with stress. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are located just above the brainstem. We know where the adrenals are found. They sit on top of the kidneys. We talk about the hypothalamus being in charge of the stress response, whether it's a sudden burst of stress or whether it's ongoing stress. And so what happens when we have stress, or when a stress response is triggered, is that signals are sent by the hypothalamus, firstly to the pituitary. When the pituitary gland is activated by the hypothalamus, it then activates the adrenal glands. And so the hypothalamus, first of all, releases corticotropin releasing hormone. And this corticotropin releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland. Sensing this signal, the pituitary gland then releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. And this stimulates the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands will then produce adrenal hormones. What's interesting is when we look at the hormones produced by the adrenal gland, we know that once these have been produced, and this might be adrenaline or it might be cortisol as part of the stress response, once the stressor has been resolved, then there's a negative feedback loop that stops the release of that stops the release of corticotropin releasing hormone, and also it stops the release of the adrenocorticotropic hormone as well. And that negative feedback loop then restores homeostasis. But we know that where there is chronic stress, this negative feedback loop does not happen. And so you have the hypothalamus releasing more and more corticotropin releasing hormone, which then causes the pituitary gland to release more adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then we have the adrenal glands releasing their two types of hormones. And so this is when we have long-term ongoing stress that this happens. So when we look at the adrenal glands, we identify the adrenal medulla and also the adrenal cortex. And we know that the adrenal medulla is responsible for releasing, we know that the adrenal medulla is responsible for releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is adrenaline and noradrenaline. And we know that the adrenal cortex is responsible for releasing glucocorticoids. The one that we focus on is cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone that is released by the adrenal cortex, and its job is to then cause the release of glucose from the liver. So in times of stress, our blood glucose levels go up, and this really is designed to provide the energy to allow for us to escape. But unfortunately, if we actually do not have anything that we're running away from, but we have this chronic ongoing stress, then this can then be a problem, because the long-term association of chronic stress, one of them is diabetes. The release of cortisol from the adrenal cortex causes the immune system to become suppressed. And that's why where someone has ongoing chronic stress, they are a lot more susceptible to infection. Think of colds and flus that happen when someone is run down, where they're sort of in overdrive. That stress can cause illness to happen in the body. An evolving body of literature exists exploring the underlying pathophysiological mechanisms by which psychosocial stress influences skin homeostasis. So now that we've looked at stress, we are going to be looking at the connection between stress and inflammatory skin conditions. There's actually a body or a specialty that is growing and gaining momentum, and this is called psychodermatology. And psychodermatology actually looks at the link between skin health and our psyche. So psyche, from the first part of the word, and then dermatology or skin forms the second part of it. So this field actually connects mind and the body. And it's really interesting because dermatologists actually saw an overwhelming increase in the number of people that they saw with exacerbated inflammatory skin conditions, or saw patients who had inflammatory skin conditions experience flare-ups during COVID. So last year, when we were locked away, people experienced social isolation, they lost their jobs. We looked to the States and we saw marches, organized marches happening across the States in response to social unrest caused by George Floyd being killed by the police officer. And so these sorts of stressors manifest as aggravated skin conditions, inflammatory skin conditions. I found this quite interesting. So this is a table that shows that psychocutaneous conditions are characterized by those disorders where stress is the key element in exacerbating skin conditions or flare-ups of such dermatoses as psoriasis and acne and alopecia areata and rosacea, urticaria, pompholyx, and also vitiligo. 30 to 40% of patients seeking treatment for skin disorders were found to have an underlying psychiatric or psychological disorder that exacerbated it. So what this shows you is the percentage of patients reporting exacerbations of their skin conditions with stress. So it's a very real connection. So when we look at this brain-skin connection, what's quite fascinating is that embryologically, the skin and the brain both stem from the same origin, and that is the ectoderm. The ectoderm is the outer layer of cells of an embryo. They are essentially formed from the same group of cells, and thus establishes a fundamental physiological connection between both the skin and the brain. And so research has revealed a complex brain-skin connection, an interplay of neurologic, endocrine, immune, and cutaneous systems, in which the skin may act as an independent local stress response system. And so what's fascinating is that we talk about the HPA axis that exists between the brain and the adrenal glands. But what they've found is that the skin actually has its own HPA axis. So it's believed that the skin may have a peripheral equivalent of the HPA axis, which is the body's central stress response system. And what the skin's HPA axis allows it to do is to coordinate peripheral stress responses with the central HPA axis. So there's that communication again, that brain-skin connection. So we have stress that is going on internally that manifests on the skin. But the converse is also the case. So inflammatory skin conditions also have that internal association. So whenever someone comes to see you with acne or psoriasis or eczema, it's really important as part of the consultation that we look to see what their lifestyle is like. We look to see whether there are stressors in their lives that are possibly exacerbating their condition. So studies exploring the brain-skin connection have revealed that the skin is both a prominent target organ and produces neuroendocrine, neurotransmitter, and neuropeptide signals. And all of these profoundly affect skin biology. Nerve cells, immune cells, skin cells, and signaling molecules are involved in the crosstalk or the communication that occurs between the nervous system and the skin. I find that fascinating. Upon perception of stress, the skin may respond by releasing inflammatory cytokines that can lead to mast cell activation. And so what's really interesting is that as part of the skin's response to stress, it can also release a neuropeptide called substance P. And what that does is it activates the mast cells to release inflammatory mediators and also histamine. So this activation in turn may promote immune dysregulation and neurogenic inflammation. Stress impairs the barrier function of skin, increases inflammation, and induces or worsens the course of various skin disorders. So have a look at this next slide. So you can see the histamine-like response on the torso of this person as a result of stress that they're experiencing. You can see the forehead of the lady where you also have an inflammatory response as a result of stress. And so I mentioned before that stress disables or suppresses the skin's immune response. We know that it increases inflammation, it impairs wound healing. Stress can also increase sebum production. So when we talk about acne, acne conditions, acne skin conditions, and we look at the overproduction of sebum, we directly link this to an androgenic response as a result of stress. So I'll be touching on that shortly. And then also another impact of stress on skin health is the impaired resistance to infection. So we know that emotions play a big role in skin diseases. It's said that approximately 50% of people with acne reported an emotional trigger to their breakouts. At least 80% of those with atopic dermatitis state psychological stress aggravates or brings about their itch. More than 90% of those with rosacea said that stress triggered a flare-up, making their skin hypersensitive. And about nearly 100% of those with hyperhidrosis, where they have excess sweating in the armpits especially, identify that emotions triggered their reaction. Recurrent flares of psoriasis have been attributed to stress in up to 80% of individuals. And what's more, in psoriasis patients with associated depression, 9.7% of those people affected acknowledged a wish to be dead. And 5.5% reported active suicidal ideation. So you can see that people who suffer with these inflammatory skin conditions may have a lot bubbling underneath the surface that we are unaware of. And so when they come to see us, of course, we provide a safe place. But really, I think it's important that we look a little bit beyond the surface or beneath the surface to really try to get to the bottom of why they present as they have. So let's now have a look at some of the common inflammatory skin conditions that we come across. Let's look at acne. So we understand the pathophysiology of acne, but do we pay enough attention to the impact of stress on the condition? So stress and hormones are the two biggest adult acne triggers. We look at hormones, but do we pay enough attention to stress? So we know that when someone is in a stressed state, the adrenal cortex secretes cortisol, our stress hormone. What we may not be aware of, however, is that it also releases androgens. So there is an androgenic response to stress that causes excessive oil production. Oil becomes thick, sticky, and waxy. We also know that stress causes an adrenaline response as well. So we have adrenaline produced from the medulla, and we have cortisol produced from the adrenal cortex. And so both of these need to be addressed if we are to successfully manage acne. Inflammation and increased sebaceous gland production are both pathogenic factors for acne. I'm showing a dark-skinned person because not only do we have the obvious acne lesions, but we also have post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And that, I think, worse than the acne breakouts, can be quite psychologically damaging for the person because it instantly lowers self-esteem. And so we really want to reassure the patient and let them know that they've come to the right place. We can manage their pigment with our pigment inhibitors and maybe some peels, as well as manage the acne, of course. So next we look at rosacea. And unlike we have popularly been taught, rosacea is not a condition that is associated with lower Fitzpatrick phototypes. It actually can affect everybody from a phototype 1 all the way through to a phototype 6. A lot of the research was done on the lower Fitzpatricks, and that's why we often hear rosacea called the Celtic curse, because it has been confined to phototypes 1 and 2, fair-haired, fair-eyed, fair-skinned people. But that's only because the research was not done to actually include higher phototypes. And of course, a higher phototype may not necessarily have the manifestations that we associate with rosacea, where we have that butterfly redness in that centromalar area. We don't tend to see that in a darker skin because the pigment actually hides the inflammation. But there can be other symptoms, such as the papulopustular lesions that we. So there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that stress can play a big role in the flare-ups that some of the rosacea sufferers experience. There was a survey carried out by the National Rosacea Society where they looked at emotional stress and its impact on rosacea. And 2/3 of the respondents said that they were able to reduce their flare-ups by minimizing the causes of their stress and emotional reactions. And so that's something that we as therapists can actually make a note of when you have patients or clients who come to see you with rosacea. Are we looking at what might be the causes for the flare-ups? Have we looked at lifestyle and maybe try to identify what for them are their causes of stress? Because if we can manage those for them, then we can hopefully better manage rosacea. It is thought that emotional stress and endogenous hormones may stimulate the release of neurotransmitters, which contribute to vasodilation, flushing, and increased skin sensitivity. And so we've talked already about the role of these neurotransmitters causing flushing responses. So during a stressful period, there's an increase in antimicrobial and neurogenic, vascular, and endothelial influences. So we all understand the pathophysiology of rosacea. What we maybe have not really taken heed to or understood is that stress must always be factored in as a very real trigger, causing the release of histamine, which can exacerbate this flushing response. So next, we'll look at atopic dermatitis. And we know that one of the key factors when it comes to atopic dermatitis or eczema is the evident epidermal permeability. So there's a lot of scratching and itching, and it causes that barrier function impairment. And so stress, did you know, can also increase that permeability and also cause that barrier impairment to worsen. And so when the barrier function is impaired, it allows for the penetration of irritants that can then further exacerbate the condition. A study found that defects in skin barrier function could be reversed by adding anti-anxiety medications to the treatment. And what this shows you is that that brain-skin connection is very real. By giving the patient an anti-anxiety medication, imagine the barrier function being restored. Another study was done on medical students who were going through an exam, and what they found was that the stress that they experienced, the psychological stress that they experienced during this study time, was associated with deterioration in transcutaneous water permeability. So transepidermal water loss occurred because barrier function became impaired during these stressful times. But after the exams, this reversed. So once again, showing you the very real connection between stress and the skin response. Next, we'll look at psoriasis. Psoriasis, we still don't understand why it happens. We know that it is an autoimmune condition. There are quite a number of theories that abound. One of them is the involvement of substance P, the neuropeptide that I mentioned before. And substance P acts as a neurotransmitter and also as a neuromodulator. And what they found is that where levels are excessive, this can cause an inflammatory response. We talked before about substance P causing mast cell activation and the release of histamine. And what we know is that where stress is at its where stress is heightened or at its highest, then cortisol can actually cause these psoriatic plaques to form. Heightened stress levels release increased levels of cortisol, and this has resulted in psoriasis becoming exacerbated. You can always tell when the patient with psoriasis is in that inflammatory phase because the lesions, those plaques, are red and itchy in some cases, and they're oozing and weeping. When the stress has normalized and whatever the trigger is has passed, then those plaques take on a very silvery appearance, but there's no inflammation present. You can see the poor boy on the top of the top right hand of the screen. So you can see those plaques, but there isn't any inflammation really with it. So when someone comes in with psoriasis that is inflamed, maybe some light therapy would be a good idea, with some soothing balm, perhaps. There would be no exfoliation or anything like that. And when you have gotten the client, when you've gotten the client's stress under control and the plaques have turned silvery and they've dried out, enzymes work really well on lifting those dead layers of skin cells. So we've looked at the common skin conditions that we tend to see a lot of. We're now going to have a look at how we can effectively manage stress. So I'm going to be giving you a few little tips and some food for thought when it comes to stress management. I think the first thing is trying to encourage the person, or if you're the sufferer, to not be so hard on yourself and to try to manage unrealistic goals. People who always try to get things perfect are always going to end up with disappointment. So it's managing unrealistic goals. It's changing unrealistic expectations. It's also perhaps reprioritizing, giving or allowing or providing some time for some self-care practice. I had this lady come to see me with quite bad acne, and she was in a new job that was highly stressful for her. And she would bring her work home with her every night and on the weekends. And all the joy had been taken out of her life because she was bound to her desk every day after work and then on the weekends. And so I then asked her what things she missed doing. And one of them was reading. She was an avid reader and she hadn't read for quite a while, or since she had started this new job. And so I said to her that I wanted her to make some changes, because the reality of it was that if she didn't get all that work finished, she could carry on doing it at work the next day. She was the kind of person who was stuck to her device until late every night. So she would be up till all hours, working on her computer, but then on her phone in bed. So we made it a point of her stopping her social media engagement. I tried to say 9:30. She said 10 would be more realistic. She was then going to have a bath because she enjoyed having a bath to unwind. And while she was unwinding with some candles lit, she would read her book. In the morning, she was going to get up half an hour earlier than she normally would to go for a walk. She then came to see me 6 weeks later, and her skin had cleared. And she was so excited to tell me that she had rediscovered the joy of reading and that she had made those changes and they had made an incredible difference. So self-care practices are very important. It might also be, rather than trying to do everything yourself, that you delegate tasks, you allow people to help you. And if you can't change a situation, then you learn to accept it and do so without feeling stressed. So next, we're going to have a look at ways that we can really promote the relaxation response. And that is by getting out and moving, incorporating exercise into your daily routine. I go for a walk every morning. And for me, it serves as a way of just getting out with nature. I find that I'm able to take in deeper breaths. I find that it relieves any kind of tension that I have. So walking for me is a great anti-stressor. I had a lady come to see me who ran 6 out of 7 days a week. Excess running is not a good way to manage stress. It actually increases stress because it increases your cortisol levels. So walking is good, or swimming. And then breath work. So there's a lot of research on showing how deep abdominal breathing has a direct impact on stress release. And then mindfulness techniques such as meditation and yoga, Tai Chi. I find at night, if I can't sleep, that I go onto Spotify and I put on some music that helps me relax and then sends me to sleep. Also, being mindful of what you're eating, taking the time to prepare your meals rather than buying fast food when you are at work. Trying to focus on really nourishing and feeding your body with nutritious food. And then sleep. Sleep is so important, and many of us do not get adequate sleep. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about sleep because we spend up to 80% of our time indoors. And we are in an artificially lit environment. What we don't realize is that this artificial light actually has an impact on the way that our body responds. When we think of it, blue light, we find, so this is the visible spectrum of light, we find at midday when the sun is at its highest point in the sky. And that should be where we get our blue light from. But unfortunately, we're exposed to blue light right through the evening. We have blue light that comes through the lux from our light bulbs. And what this does is it alters our natural circadian rhythm. What's interesting is that melatonin is called the hormone of darkness. And when we think of the cave people, at night, they would light a fire. And that's how they would be able to see what was within their immediate vicinity. It also meant that melatonin was able to be activated to then promote sleep. But this doesn't happen with us because we have the blue light from the light bulbs, we have blue light from our computer screens, we have blue light from our devices, from our iPads, from our phones. The number of people that hop into bed scrolling through their phones at night and then wonder why they struggle to fall asleep. So I think it would be a good idea to make a point of actually stopping your device time a good 2 hours before you go to bed. I think a nice way to end the evening would be to have a shower or a bath and then hop into bed. I'm not sure whether you are aware that a report published found that people who had less than 7 hours of sleep a night were at an increased risk of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, depression, and kidney disease. And behavioral factors such as stress, which we've spent the whole presentation looking at, anxiety, depression, and poor sleep were all identified to be associated with other inflammatory skin conditions. So that's another thing that you need to look at. Find out from your clients what happens at night, how soon they switch off their devices before they go to bed, because there might be something in that. If they're the type of people that go to bed and start to shop, they need to stop that to help repair their skin. So the last part of the presentation is going to look at nutrition for stress management. It's very evident that a diet that is high in sugar has been linked to cognitive impairment and emotional disorders such as anxiety and depression. I actually had a high-level executive come to see me. And he came to see me because he wasn't sleeping very well. And as we got talking, it soon became apparent that he was chronically depressed and had been put on different types of depression medication. And what this had done was end up with some quite severe side effects. So he'd stopped taking them. This man was a very disciplined man. He exercised every day, he ate well. But one thing that he did at night, every night, to reward himself for a hard day's work was raid the chocolate tray in the fridge. And this tray was full of all kinds of chocolates and lollies and different types of sweets. And he would sit in front of the telly for 2 hours eating chocolate. And what he didn't realize was that that was definitely linked to is depression. And so we know of the relationship that exists between diet and our physical health. We know that. There is, however, a growing area of research that is now focusing on the connection between food and mood, or food and mental health. When I did my master's degree at Deakin University, there was a growing interest in this area. And now they've set up the Food and Mood Center, where they actually look at the impact that diet has on anxiety, depression, etc. So it's a very exciting time, I think. So when we look at the food-brain connection, we know that nutrients such as vitamin D and vitamin C and magnesium are very important. But rather than focus on these single nutrients, I think it's better to look at how we can actually absorb these nutrients through whole foods. So we're going to have a look at that shortly. But I think it's important for us to be aware that in the Western diet, half of the calories consumed come from foods that are ultra processed. Australia is very much like America when it comes to the way that we eat. Uber Eats, I feel, has been the bane of our existence. Everything is around convenience because we live such busy lives. It's all about convenience. People would rather pay for processed fast food than spend a bit of time in the kitchen cooking. And so burgers and chips and packaged bread and soft drinks and fruit juices and fruit drinks and lollies and sauces that are, packed with sugar. Breakfast cereals as well that are highly processed, refined and packed with sugar. We eat meats that are processed, that have no nutritional value to them. And all of these things lead to chronic health conditions. They're all linked to diet. Sorry, they're all linked to disease. So poor diet is linked to disease. We know cognitive impairment is the result of eating like this, but anxiety, mood disorders, depression as well. So when we look at the overconsumption of alcohol, alcoholic beverages and sugar and salt, we know that these all strip the body of essential nutrients. And we know that sugar increases an impulsivity to continue to eat. We know that it actually alters emotional states. We know that by increasing our intake of stress-busting nutrients and limiting the overindulgence of these sorts of stress-induced foods, that we actually feel better about ourselves. The number of people or clients that I see whose diet I change. So one of the things that I do is I provide meal plans, skin condition specific meal plans to skin clinics to give to their clients. And whenever I see a client, I always give them a meal plan for whatever the skin condition is. And just by altering the way that they're eating, the first thing that they say to me is, oh my gosh, I feel so good. The brain fog has gone. My skin looks a lot better. So it really does give our bodies the chance to cope and recover better from stressful situations and events. What about our addiction to coffee? Oh my gosh. The number of people who say to me, oh no, I can't get my day started without a coffee. I need a coffee to get my day started. We know that caffeine can actually, along with stress, elevate cortisol levels. And so those of us that drink a lot of coffee throughout the day, we know that this can lead to an inability to switch off by the end of the evening. And so what I typically will recommend is if you're going to have a coffee, you need to be aware that it actually caffeine stays in your body for up to 6 hours. And so it's a good idea to have your coffee fixed in the morning. And then from lunchtime on, maybe swap to a herbal tea or a sparkling water or an exciting elixir that I'm going to be sharing a little bit about shortly. And what these will help definitely do is increase your sleep. So when we look at a Western diet that is very high in fat and sugar and refined carbohydrates, we know that it increases inflammation, it increases oxidative stress in the body, and it also decreases the hippocampal volume. So we know that the hippocampus is associated with learning and memory and mood regulation. And so when there is stability and growth in the hippocampus, we associate it with positive mental well-being. And when we see a change or a shrinking in the hippocampus, it's linked to reduced mental well-being or depression. And so a Western diet has been associated with smaller hippocampal volume. And the flip side of that is a diet that is more of a Mediterranean-based diet that's really rich in fruits and, rich in vegetables and some moderate amounts of fruit. And this was associated with a larger hippocampal volume. Along with that, we found that that sort of diet decreased inflammation and also decreased oxidative stress. So, what should we eat? I think it's important, as we mentioned before, to make the majority of what you eat be vegetable-based with some moderate amounts of fruit, but really target fruit and veg that are high in vitamin B and also vitamin C and magnesium. And so when we look at those kinds of foods, we are really talking about bananas that are very rich in group B vitamins, leafy green vegetables, avocados, nuts, seeds, red meat, fish, dairy products, they all contain the essential B group vitamins. And then for vitamin C, so vitamin B is going to increase your energy levels, so make people feel a lot more energetic after a stressful period. Then we have vitamin C. I don't know whether you are aware that the adrenal glands contain the largest stores of vitamin C in the body. And they're really important for the production of stress hormones, vitamin C is. And so we think of our citrus fruits, such as oranges, we think of strawberries and tomatoes, kiwi fruit, green leafy vegetables, broccoli. These are all rich sources of vitamin C. And then we look at magnesium, which is important for the reduction of anxiety and to relax our muscles. We look to increase the amount of nuts that we eat, especially Brazil nuts, hazelnuts, peanuts also, leafy green vegetables, whole grains, especially oats, legumes, they're all a good source of magnesium. You can also have maybe once a week, you can have a nice bath with a handful of Epsom salts in it. And that allows magnesium to be absorbed through the skin. And there are now high absorption transdermal patches that are also an option. So when we look at the Mediterranean diet, if you Google the Mediterranean diet, you will see that it has won the award for the best diet, I think 3 years in a row. And even though the term diet is a very temporary term, I always think of a diet as producing results that are not sustainable. The Mediterranean diet is more of a lifestyle. So we're looking at fish, oily fish that's a really rich source of omega-3s that have an anti-inflammatory response in the body. Looking at lots of vegetables that are rich in fiber, which our gut will love. We're looking at legumes and a diet that is very lacking in processed foods. And so by increasing your intake of these sorts of foods and decreasing your intake of processed foods, you will actually find that you're better able to manage your stress response. And so to conclude my talk today, I think that the takeaway is the importance of increasing your ability to cope with stress. And resilience does that. Someone who is resilient is able to adapt to the psychological and physiological factors involved in the body's stress response. And research has found that people who have a positive, optimistic outlook and have good problem solving, coping mechanism skills tend to deal with stress very effectively. And here's a little take home message. 80% of stress management is accomplished with the first 20% of effort. And so what that means is just decide to make a change, because that decision with you taking one small daily step, and this might be just going out for a 15 or 20-minute walk, goes a long way in managing stress-related symptoms. And I've seen that time and time again. Just introducing one small habit really is the start of change. And so I hope that with the little tips that I've given you, that you are now equipped with tools that you can use on yourself, but also use on your clients to help better manage their inflammatory skin conditions. Once again, I would like to thank you very much for your time today. And here is a little bit of encouragement to leave you with. So it's a good way to finish. A diamond is just a piece of charcoal that handles stress exceptionally well. So remember that stress is a normal part of life. And for those that are prone to stress, and I mean chronic stress, hopefully you will look back on the presentation and put some of the tools that I have touched on today into good use. I look forward to hearing from you. And once again, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you for your time.